Hi, everyone. How are we doing? You're good?
Great.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. I always say time is the most valuable currency you have, and the fact that you decided to show up today and share it with us, we're really grateful for that. As mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the very end. I'll start the conversation. Vicky and I have been friends now for about 2 years since I've been at the Today Show. And so when she asked me to sit next to her, not only to read her book, but to moderate a conversation, I will say it was such an honor and I'm excited to be here. I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you.
The feeling is so mutual. You're reminding me of what does Jay-Z say in his song Hova, right? Of all the places in the world that you could be, you're here with us. So thank you very much for that.
That sounds way better than how I said
what you
it.
said was beautiful.
Way better.
Time is a valuable
It's
currency.
the writer,
I didn't want to say it
non-writer.
again. No, stop.
It's the writer, non-writer. Just to understand, and there's no right or wrong question, answer here. How many of you have read the book? Perfect. Okay, so what we'll do is we are going to give insight to the book. So you have a copy of the book, or you'll get a copy of the book. So what we'll do is we want to go a little bit further and deeper. Some of you will understand the stories and the reference points, but we want to give you insight of what's coming when you do read the book. With that, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this beautiful title. We were having a conversation before, and it was just what referenced earlier. The book is called Boat Baby, which is a reference to boat people, specific to Cambodian and Vietnamese folks who were refugees. They're fleeing their country, specifically in Vietnam. This was around the time in your book where northern Vietnam was reunifying the country under communistic rules, right? Under communist rules. And your story begins there with your parents doing that, which was really intense and captivating. But why Boat Baby as the title, understanding the reference and also the attachment to the reunification of a country?
Yeah. So by way of background, to follow up on what Ali said, between 1975 and 1992, roughly 2 million people left Vietnam because they didn't want to be under the communist rule. The fall of Saigon just commemorated 50 years on April 30th of this year, so just like last week. And so a lot of people had to flee by boat. You know, they had to cross the South China Sea, and my family was among that 2 million. But they didn't leave. My parents didn't leave until after I was born. They left when I was 8 months old. So I was literally a boat baby on that fishing boat that managed to get to a refugee camp in Pulau Bidong, Malaysia. And so that picture that you see on the cover is me, probably a few months after we got there, because I'm standing. I actually learned how to walk on the beach there because I was 8 months and we stayed on that refugee camp for 10 months. And that was, one of the ways that my 2 uncles and my great aunt, my mom and dad, passed the time, was just carrying me around, playing with me, teaching me how to walk, and waiting. There was a lot of waiting on that island because we were waiting to find out which country would sponsor us from Malaysia. And Canada, Belgium, Australia, France, those were all among the countries that were taking Vietnamese refugees at that time. But my dad was very, very convinced that, as he said, America was the biggest and the best. So our family would wait. And so we waited and waited. And then after 10 months, we were finally sponsored. And the first place we landed was Eugene, Oregon. And you all may know that. It's Track City, USA, right? It's known for track and field. But what it's known for, to me, is the Ware family and a Methodist church and a Lutheran church who all united and said, let's help this family from halfway across the world resettle in our town. And it was because my mom had worked with Holt International Children's Services. That's an adoption agency that worked with children from Korea and India and China and Vietnam. And so she wrote a letter during the months that they were waiting in Malaysia. We were all waiting, and wrote a letter to just Holt, like, Dear Holt, this is my name, this is my family, this is our situation. Is there anyone who can help sponsor us? And then Wanel Ware, who, if you've watched the Today Show, you may have seen that story featuring Don and Wanel, because many, many years later, who would have thunk that I would be a correspondent at the Today Show? And I brought them to New York City on an incredible day to see behind the scenes at the Today Show. And it was a classic Today Show day. We had the band Coldplay live on the plaza. The entire cast of Dateline was in the studio because they were introducing a new correspondent. So Don and Wanel got the VIP treatment on one of the best days they could have had at the Today Show. But they were the ones that got the letter and basically said, absolutely, we've got to figure out how to mobilize and make this happen.
One of the things you do really well, and you did this in the book, but you do this in a lot of the interviews and when we talk, is that you can package things to sound really good. And while what you mentioned was really terrifying and tough and goes into deep detail in the book, what I recognize about you is that while you're able to package hardship into a memoir that is enticing and impactful and impressive, one of the things you also do really well is that you live through uncertainty. And uncertainty is a thread, and I pulled that thread throughout the entire book when I was reading it back in April, and I got one of the first copies. I was privileged enough to get one of the first copies, is uncertainty. And you're able to live with uncertainty, through uncertainty, throughout your entire career. How has uncertainty shaped who you are today?
I have to give that credit, really, frankly, to my parents who lived with the most uncertainty of all. When they made the decision with an 8-month-old baby to say, we are going to risk everything, we are going to make this sacrifice, it was all in service to me. I mean, that's the way they describe it, is like that solidified, it cemented, it was the catalyst for them saying, we cannot raise a child here. Because I was born in 1978 and my parents didn't leave until 1979. That's 4 years after the fall of Saigon. So they had spent time trying to live in this reunified country under communist rule. They had both worked, my dad had served as a medic in the South Vietnamese army. So he's on the losing side. My mom worked with American companies. That was frowned upon. So it was really hard for them to even find a legitimate way to make a living in this new country. And so they had me, and they tell me that thinking of me growing up in that country and going to school and being told by my teachers, make sure you're listening to what your parents say at home. If they say anything that's against the government, if they're complaining, if they say this, or this, make sure you come back and tell us here at school. My parents were very afraid of me being brainwashed or of me being raised in a country where I didn't have freedom and freedom of thought and independence. So for them, having a little baby was the reason they needed to get out. And nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is promised. They had already heard many stories about people who capsized at sea, terrible things that happened to people who simply disappeared and they just never heard from them again. So they knew in a way what they were getting into, but they also had a lot of hope. They also had a real, an optimism. And they also believed that you can only control so many things in life. Some things are left up to fate. That is a recurring theme in the book as well, fate and uncertainty. So focus on what you can control and don't worry about the rest. And I think that is an attitude that I carry with me now. And I went into a profession, journalism, where things are very uncertain. Things are changing all of the time. And I can't control the current events and whatever, but I can control who I choose to talk to, the way that I portray my stories, the way that I write my stories, the stories that I choose to pursue and pitch. And so I focus on kind of doing my best and forgetting the rest, to put it as a second grader would understand it.
Yes, focusing on doing your best and forgetting the rest. And I think you do that really well, because what we're living is in a society where war is still pretty prevalent in the sense of folks having to flee their country, whether by design or by just sheer lack of resources. And you hear these stories all the time. And I'm curious, because you've lived a story that is similar to many of the stories that we see, unfortunately, in the news, and you're in the news, and that you see daily, and that you're constantly reminded of. And while you're able to provide hope within your personal memoir, how do you reframe your mental capacity or mental setting before you step in front of the camera, knowing that there are so many people similar to you that are currently going through devastating times in the country that they either reside, again, leaving either by design or by hardship?
I mean, Ukraine and Gaza are never far from my thoughts and from my heart, not only because we, talk about them daily on my show, but because what happened in Vietnam, what's happening in the world today, unfortunately, war has been such a part of humankind for as long as we've been around. And sometimes you feel a little you feel helpless because this is happening in another place. You know that these families want the same thing that your family wants, the same thing you want for your own family. So I think there is a degree of empathy that I always keep when I'm reporting on these stories, but also compartmentalization. You do have to sometimes put things in places so that you can do what it is that you're expected to do, whether it's your job, whether it's being a mom, whether it's, being a friend or a neighbor. I think it is important to control the sphere of influence that we each have. So at our school, for example, we had like an international fair. It's only the third year that this school, which is 100 years old, has done this. And it means that kids with different backgrounds, who come from different countries, or maybe their parents do, come and you put up like a trifold and you tell everybody about the country, the language, the exports from your country, you provide some food. And it's just a conversation point. It's a place for people to connect and learn about each other. And we do drives to like get clothing and get donations to ship overseas, because I think you have to do what you can, the best that you can. And then also I have a real attitude of gratitude. I know that we are so lucky what my parents survived. You know, I was too little to remember any of it. So I feel very lucky because I didn't have to go through all the bad stuff. I've pretty much only gotten to experience the good stuff. Every family has a rocky journey and, you know, it's a bumpy road. But those are sort of the things that I try to teach my kids, to be grateful for what they have, to understand what other people in other parts of not just the world, but our own country, what people are going through, so that they know when they're out there interacting with people to give grace, to lead with grace, and to give what they can, whether it's time, attention, learning so that they can be educated. And then I do think that's an area we could improve, like doing some more service. It's hard. We get caught up in our everyday lives and sports and activities and work and whatnot. But that is something that I hope that I can continue to seed in my children, is understanding to whom much is given, much is expected.
And you do that very well, not only as a friend, but also in this narrative. Also something that I noticed that you do really well, so you were able to thread a needle that is quite challenging. You provide levity in some of the toughest moments in the book, some of the most uncertain moments in the book. And I really do find that as a skill set. Like most times when I get into a conversation, or if, you know, I don't write, but like if I was in those moments, I think of just like how tough this is, how hard this is. I like, you go into tears and that's the moment, and you stay in it and you sit in it and you absorb it. But what you did in this book is you were able to take us along a journey. And we recognized the challenge. We were there alongside you and your parents throughout the challenge. And at very peculiar but necessary moments, you were able to add levity and humor. And being able to insert that is not something that I think is easy for most folks. Was that intentional? Or did that just come about after you went back and just read the book and it was just there?
I mean, I will say, I do think that's just embedded in me. And by the way, don't sell yourself short. You are a great writer. I read the things that you put down. I read the inspirational messages that you share. She has like 1 million followers on social media. Don't let her downplay that, okay? Your writing is very inspiring. I will say, like, my family does have a sense of humor. I have a sense of humor. I read, like, I think you probably know David Sedaris. He's written a lot of books. He's kind of a satirist, but he talks about how, like, most things in life are really funny. If you're alive and you survive it, give it a little bit of time and look back on it, and it's probably funny. There's probably some humor in it somewhere. And I will say, when my parents talk about being on this boat, crossing the South China Sea, and not being sure if they're going to make it to land. Once they've left, we don't know, you know. And then they see like these pirates, Thai pirates. That was a very common occurrence for a lot of boat people because they were just sitting targets. You know, people left with whatever they had. Usually they had some gold to use as bribes. So these pirates knew, like, if we find these refugee boats, we can get on, we can get gold, you know, and that's an easy target, easier than fishing, basically. So when my parents look back on that experience and people came on with their faces painted white and shooting guns and yelling like tong, 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 which means gold, 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 my parents look back on that. And I have never heard my parents use the word trauma. They have never called themselves brave. They've never referred to themselves as survivors. These are all like words that people are assigning to them now, which I agree with, but it's just not how I grew up viewing them, nor is it how they spoke of themselves. And so they come back and they recount that story, and they are all about like the sunny side up of it, the silver lining of it all. Like, well, at least they didn't throw anybody overboard. At least they didn't rape anybody. At least they didn't kill anybody. All they wanted was gold. So that was good. And I just feel like, my gosh, when you can look at one of probably the scariest moments in your life and reframe it in that way, I think that has stuck with me. And it is sort of the lens through which I see my life too. Definitely things have happened that were not great. You know, we've had our fair share of struggles and conflicts, and, you know, some of it I talk about in the book, what it was like for me starting off in this career where, like, you don't make very much money. and then feeling some financial pressure as my parents, who had achieved the American dream, some things started to like not go so well. But I just feel like I learned so much from their why not us? There's something that's going to come around the bend. That attitude of, as long as we wake up in the morning, we can set our 2 feet on the ground and we have agency and freedom over our lives. What more could we ask for? And I think when you go through life and you appreciate all of those moments, the moments that make up the everyday, not the highs of like, oh, this award or that recognition, you know, and not the lows, but when you just can say like, today is a Tuesday and I'm happy that I get to go to work, that I get to go to school, that I get to, you know, have this assignment, whatever it is, when you reframe it instead of I have to do this thing or I have to get on the train, when you think of everything as like, what a privilege, how lucky we are, then it is easier to have that really optimistic and, you know, grateful look at life. And it's not to say you are always looking through rosy colored glasses, but it just makes the hard times easier to bear.
The aperture for me was widened a little bit because, again, packaging things sounds amazing. In the book, when your parents are here and they're getting themselves together, they're getting their lives together, focusing on work, they're building something for their family, you have a position in their life that's a little different. You have autonomy. Like most kids, like growing up, I didn't have autonomy. Like my parents were like, you're in the house at this time, you do this. You had autonomy and you were able to push buttons with your parents, not speaking English as their first language, kind of translating a little bit in the very beginning. You were able, I found, again, humorous, you were able to push buttons with your parents or get what you wanted by kind of like continuing to ask, like pets that you were allergic to.
Yes.
Like they would give you things that were actually like not necessarily aligned with what you needed at the time. She gets a pet, she's allergic to it, then gets another one and still has an allergy. Like, but she's able to kind of negotiate with your parents. A lot of what you're saying right now is something that you learned by watching. Most parents say, do as I say, not as I do. And for Vicky, for me in the book, I noticed that there was a transition point, and we talked about this for you, but a lot of it was that you watched your parents, although you had a quite the elaborate autonomy at a young age to kind of stay out, hang with your neighbors, do all of these things, get curious around growing up. There was a turning point that you had in your life where you were like, oh, I want to get into a good college. I want to have a good career. So therefore, you're going to decide, kind of like self-police a little bit, like self-correct and say, I'm going to go and be an A-type personality, for lack of a better word, like to just go ahead, and you were able to watch them and absorb through their actions behaviors that you now mimic and replicate and embody of being consistent, somewhat being an overachiever, always living up to this idea that there's a dream and I want to fulfill it. Mm-hmm. Do you recognize that part of yourself when you go back and read in the little girl who was just like out there living her life, no consequences in terms of from her parents, and just wild and getting curious? Do you recognize that turning point was something that you decided in the moment, or was it hindsight for you?
That's such a great observation. I really appreciate that. I will say you're absolutely right. I was an only child. My parents got here so busy. They were like in community college, learning English, working all the jobs, and just were like, you were enough. Like you were a handful. That was good. And you're right. I must have learned a lot just by osmosis because we were a typical Asian family in the sense there's not a lot of words of affirmation. There's not a lot of praise. There's not like the outward affection and the I love you. You know your parents love you because they work really hard. They come home. They make like a 5-course meal for you. You know they love you through acts of service. But as a kid, when you're in an American environment and you're looking at your friends and everyone's like, good job on that report card, or like, oh, Timmy, you know, we're so proud of you. Like these are words you never hear in your own household. So it's a little bit of a disconnect. I will say I was a beggar because I begged for things. Like I just wore them down. I think as kids do. And because they were so tired already, eventually I would get them to yes, whether it was like a parakeet or a goldfish or a cat, or eventually my mom, like you may have a phobia of snakes. Like I don't really like snakes, but imagine an animal that you have like the biggest phobia to. For my mom, it's rodents, which is ironic because she was born in the year of the rat. But for her, like she hates rodents. Like mice, hamsters, anything that looks like a rodent, a rat. I successfully got her to agree to let me take care of a hamster that I promised I would clean its cage and take care of it. She ended up taking care of the hamster. You know, then I graduated to guinea pigs. I mean, if you're scared of rodents, there is nothing more frightening than a guinea pig. They're like a bigger rodent, right? And so I would say my parents, in a way, were so busy that it allowed me to be very independent and have to figure things out. And as a parent now of 3 daughters, I actually try to replicate some of that. They did it out of necessity. I'm trying to do it out of both intentionality and necessity. I mean, I'm a busy person. My husband's works too. But just letting them sort things out, because when you're little, you have little problems. And if you can get through those, and as you get bigger, then you can solve your bigger problems. I think when you have to kind of navigate through some friction when you're a kid, it helps you so much as an adult. And a lot of parents, a lot of my contemporaries, I would say, we have the resources, we have the knowledge. We're so evolved as parents that we're there. We can jump in, we can solve problems, we can send emails, we can talk to that teacher. And my parents were not sending emails, they were not talking to teachers, they were not at back to school night. They were like, we have a job and your job is school. You can figure that part out. But as an adult, I'm so grateful they let me struggle and suffer a little, because it's made me into a problem solver today. And I think I saw a lot of my dad not taking no for an answer, in the sense of, if first you fail, try again. And I've always thought that was something to be admired. I think there's an insult that's sort of floating around young people these days, don't be such a try hard. And I'm like, be a try hard. What's wrong with trying hard? Anybody who's ever done anything worth doing tried hard. Simone Biles, she's got gold medals because she tried hard. That's okay. Anything worth achieving means you're going to have to put out some effort. You're going to have to try, and you're going to have to fail sometimes, and it might be even embarrassing, but it's worth it in the end, right? And so I think you're right, absolutely, that a lot of that osmosis of watching what they did, even though they didn't have the American words to tell me, this is how you do it, this is how you're going to make it, these are the things, they were doing it, and I learned that. But the moment that you're talking about, I think, to get back to your original question, was 9th grade, when I was I was a middling student. I was A's and B's, school wasn't
A's and B's.
Well, yeah,
average.
By those standards, A's and B's. So, but in 9th grade, they had this thing, and it was, you were for sure going to go to the award ceremony if you could get perfect attendance. There were multiple awards, sports awards, I wasn't going to get those. Math awards, I wasn't going to get that. But there was perfect attendance, and I was like, go to school every day. I think I can do that. I think I can go to school every day. And the other one was if you get straight A's. And I was like, well, I might be able to do that. I really want to go to this award ceremony. I don't know why, but for some reason I was fixated on this award ceremony and thinking, I think I can try. And then once I achieved it, I was like, oh, that wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. And then after you get straight A's, you're kind of like, well, why would I not get straight A's again? That's your own competition, and then it's just
But this is 9th grade, mind you,
yeah.
Self-competition.
Yeah. And I do think my parents did make it clear to me that they came to this country for me to have an education. So I knew that school was important. I loved reading. And so there were things that I think they didn't say a lot and they didn't repeat all of the time, but I knew school was important to a degree. So hence the A's and B's, but not the A's. And my parents were not tiger parents. Shockingly, they were just do your best, we're busy. And, if that's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. And I think that was the real alchemist right there, the 9th grade award ceremony that I was desperate to attend. Yeah. And also I think going back to Vietnam, which I write about, at age 11, and knowing my cousins and meeting my aunts and uncles and just seeing how different my life would have been had they not taken that chance and brought me to America. I think at 11 years old, I was 6th grade. I remember coming back to Santa Rosa, California, Sonoma County, a suburb of San Francisco, and just thinking I have running water. I didn't have running water when I was in Vietnam visiting my relatives in my mother's village. I didn't have a toilet that flushed. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have, a million things. And so as a kid, that opened my eyes so much to not taking my life for granted and to try to really make the most of all the opportunities that I had in America.
You talk about instilling those exact same values into your children. Have you been back to Vietnam with your kids? I know we've discussed this, but I'd love for you to share, what was that experience like for you, but also seeing it through their eyes with your reference point?
My older 2 have been back. They're 16 and 13 now, and my little one is 8, and I was pregnant with her, so I haven't been back for 8 years. But I will say I tried to warn them about all of these things and how it was going to be hot and there wouldn't be air conditioning, there'd be bugs and no indoor plumbing. And then we went back and it was fully modernized, hotels and taxis and everywhere was air conditioned and great food. So my kids associate Vietnam with just being a beautiful beach paradise with a lot of their relatives. They were I don't know what you're talking about. This place is really cool. They actually asked to go back all the time. So I'm happy that they had that experience. Vietnam is so tourist friendly. It is still extremely affordable. I think it's absolutely like the number one destination for anyone now. And I read this recently in the New York Times. I've always described Vietnamese people who came here as like type A++, because you have to be a certain kind of person to be willing to take that kind of risk with your family. But I've also always thought like Vietnamese people are unnaturally like joyful and energetic and like upbeat. And I thought that was just like the ones that made it over here. But no, that's the country. That's the vibe. And it's a very young country right now. And the New York Times actually like cited data that said it's a very optimistic country. Like when they've done surveys of countries and this and that, like Vietnamese people in Vietnam really have positive thoughts about the world, the future, like what's out there. And I just felt so validated because I was like, oh, this is something I always thought like instinctually and anecdotally, but now there's data to support my belief. But yeah, they ask to go back all the time. Now that we live on the East Coast, it's an even further flight. But I think in the next like big winter break, we'll try to go back because my 8-year-old is almost 9 and she's never gotten to go.
She has to get a chance.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm ready. I'm ready. You mentioned your father earlier, and I was curious, and I didn't ask you this in the back. Has he read the book?
So I think he's read, this is the way my mom has described it to me, and I gave him many manuscripts and galleys and sections to read. My mom read the book, and she said she was very interested in the parts where I talk about what it was like for me as a kid or what it was like in my jobs and the experiences that I had, things that she never knew about. She said, your dad read the book, but he read for all the parts about himself. I was like, okay, that tracks. That's very on brand. And so I think that if he were to read it in its entirety, and he helped me because he helped me remember like what it was like for him as a boy, the things that he liked to do, like who he was when he went into the military. He was drafted at 18. There was no draft dodging. There was no medical exemption. It was his brother had gone, my dad's older brother, the eldest son in the family, missing in action. So when he did make it out alive, return to his family, it was a very somber time, a little difficult to go back to that, but he was a great copy editor. He looked at it for facts, but also in a memoir, when you're writing about experiences that you have had with people who are still with you, still alive, and they may rememoir the events differently, that can lead to some tension. But at the same time, to your point, Ali, like I felt like it was important to put some of that experience in there because every family is messy. Every family does have ups and downs. And when I talk to a lot of my friends who are either immigrants or refugees, I realize that a lot of us have those relationships with one of our parents because when you are a type A risk taker, that's the gamble you take to get your family to a better life. When you are here, those same risk-taking behaviors can take your family somewhere they don't want to go. And that was very formative for me as I was starting out as a journalist. But I look back now and I think I wouldn't change any of it because let's say we were very comfortable during my early years as a journalist when it was really hard and I was one-man banding and I was working nights and weekends and Christmases and Thanksgivings and early mornings where I had to set the alarm for 2:50 a.m. just as you're getting into your good sleep. Maybe I would have bailed on journalism. Maybe I would have gone back to my comfortable life and maybe I would have, gone into a different communications field and said, I did that for 5 years, I did that for 10 years, but I've got this situation here. I don't have to keep pushing and grinding so hard. I think, pressure in some situations creates diamonds, right? It forces you to do things you wouldn't otherwise keep doing and makes you stick things out. And I think that everything happens for a reason. And so I'm so happy that we are where we are now. My parents live with us 5 days a week. They have an apartment now, so they go there on the weekends. I think it's great for everyone to have a little bit of space. But they are so close to my daughters. I am so grateful that they have this relationship that they do. Because maybe, if they still had that comfortable life, they would have stayed in California. They wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have this kind of relationship that we have now. And so, yeah, I think hopefully, eventually, someday, it will be something that, even now, I already think my dad is warmed up to it. I think he sees the response to the book.
Well, what was his response? Because my mind goes immediately when you read a story about a family, you literally take your family and insert it because you are the main character in any book, right? You insert yourself as the main character. And a really good book takes you through their book as the main character, coming out feeling like, oh, I did something incredible, which is what you did. And so I hear that, he read all the parts and like if I wrote about my mother, I'm not sure she talked to me ever again. Although she's an awesome woman, and that would be the story I'd like to convey, which is what you conveyed about him. But the specific scenarios and situations in which you shared in detail, they were pretty real and raw. So what was have you ever had a one-on-one conversation where he gave you his feelings, not maybe feedback about, you know, the factual points and reference points. Like, what was his feeling?
I think his feelings were, why would you ever write about this? And I have tried to explain in many ways why I would choose to write about it, because I think it's important that people recognize we all have struggles with our parents and we all go through things, and everyone's kind of trying to do the best with the information that they have. Like, I think I can certainly give my parents a ton of grace because I am a parent now and I know how challenging it is. And I know all of the tough things that they did. And to this day, I know, like, my dad takes the book and mails it to people. So it's like, as much as he may not love every detail that I shared, I think in time and even now, we have like reached a point where we have to agree to disagree, because it's out, it's done. The book is done. And I had many like conversations with him about like, this is why I'm writing it. This is what I've included. Let me know what you think. But short of like, you must take it all out, which I wasn't going to ever take it all out. Short of that, he just, I think, had a hard time wrapping his mind around why you would not only just write about all the best moments of your life, you know? And I think that in totality, he is not a villain in any way, shape, or form. No. In totality, the story is very much one of like these people that I'm so lucky to call my parents. And I had a lot of conversations with my editors and like readers about like, is this too much? Is this not enough? Like, is this even valuable? Should I take this out? And I think ultimately what is left, that's not the whole story. Like a book, 300 pages is not going to be your whole life and every aspect and every dimension of your relationship with your family. But I think it captures a fair amount. We're both very alike, my dad and I. So of course we're going to butt heads. Of course we're both going to be stubborn. Of course we're both going to think that we are right. And I think there's a time when your parents go from being just your parents and the authority figures to maybe not on the same level. I mean, I still will have a respect for my parents as parents, but there are things that you as an adult and a parent yourself may begin to disagree with or chart a different path for yourself. And I think that that's okay. And it doesn't mean you love them less. It doesn't mean you respect them less. Yes, I mean, I feel like if anybody shared anything about me, I would be okay with it, because as long as it were true, right? And I just feel like truth has always been my guide. We do a job where we're truth tellers, and I understand there are different perspectives in a lived experience. I tried to honor that as much as I could from my perspective. But ultimately, I am happy with what I included because it's true. I think it is fair. I think it is prescriptive. I think people can learn from it and relate to it and connect to it. And hopefully if it makes people feel less alone, which I know it has, then, you know, my dad and I, we've survived a lot of things. We will survive this too.
I love that you, and I assume much of the conversation, because he's so vibrant in the story and the narrative, that you're able to share his insight, because I've always been curious after reading. But to be honest, that was my tee-up question, because I do think the strongest character in your book, outside of it being you, is your mother. She, for me, was the takeaway and the example. I identify with you as a friend. I know your story. I've read the book. This kind of like, you know, we're A-type personality. We're going to win. We're going to build the dream. We're going to do what we need to do because that's just who we are. And what she was able to do, which is not a strength of mine, and was an area of growth for me, was she was able to be along not only for the ride, but she was able to steer the ship a little bit from the back.
Yeah.
Right? She's able to steer the ship from the back without ruffling any feathers, even in rocky water. From when the time of everything in your family seemed nice, your dad was crushing it, everything's going, and then all of a sudden you get that phone call. It's an amazing moment. You get a phone call. And you're in Vegas, you're doing your thing, you're really growing your business, you get a phone call, and your life changes. And your mother's life, specifically her life, changes. And she was able to stay grounded, stay rooted, stay connected to her family, stay dedicated to her husband and her family. And I was in awe of her, because much of what I make myself the main character. I see myself in you as you grow. I see myself in your father, because it's like, okay, these are all natural human qualities. but I could not find myself in your mother because she was that exceptional. And I have not gotten there yet. And so I'm just like curious in terms of, were you able to recognize at a young age? And again, you pay her homage throughout the book, but in all of the conversations as you talk about the book and where you are, were you able to recognize it growing up? If not, when was that moment where you're like, you have something special? The fortitude, the resilience, the subtle, quiet strength is undeniable in who she is.
First, thank you so much for putting that so beautifully. I'm going to like remember it or go back to this recording and tell my mom what you just said about her, because I think you captured it beautifully. Ooh, this is surprising. Yeah, I mean, everything you said is absolutely true. And I think it took me a long time to see it, because it's easier to recognize the loud voices in the room and the big drama and the people who have that energy. And I think like I am like you and like my dad. And so for someone to counterbalance this, it takes a very strong person, and you don't recognize that because that strength isn't right there on the surface. It's not something you wear on your sleeve. It actually comes from deep and within. And none of this is possible without my parents, but I think none of my parents is possible without my mom. And the decisions that she consciously made during tough times, when I think sometimes it's easier to break apart and go your own way than to mend something and make it stronger. And so I think that's what she did. Especially even when like I was like not a fan of like the whole scenario and wanting something maybe different. So you're absolutely right in what you observed, and like you put it so eloquently.
I know. It's like, I didn't come here to cry. I came here to talk.
Yeah, this is a first for me, Allie. Yes, this speaks to your brilliant interviewing and insight into the book. But I feel like I can still tell her that all of the time. And I think I'm still synthesizing it, frankly, because some things you don't recognize until you are yourself a wife or a mother, or you've been through similar situations. So yeah, her strength and her patience and her, even now to this day, what she tells me about the ways that she would like to be a better person. When you already think of your mom as a saint and then they're telling you they want to be a better person, you're like, that's tough. That's a tough bar. Like, how do you, but yeah, I'm glad I got to go back and delve into it and think of who she was before she was my mom. And I would recommend that to everybody. This is a lesson I really learned is our parents aren't going to be with us forever. You know, if you have your parents and you're lucky enough to still have them with you, or your grandparents or your aunts and uncles, like set aside that time to just ask them what it was like for them as a kid. What did they like to do? What did they like to read or eat? Or how did they spend their after school hours? Just take them back to when they were young and it was a different time. And just, it's an important story for you, for your own family history to pass along, but it also brings them to life in such an amazing way. It's a gift for both of you. And these are the conversations we don't have because we sort of take each other for granted sometimes. Like, okay, how about those Warriors? You know, or you're in and you're out or whatever, you know, Bay Area.
They're doing great.
Yeah, they're doing great. Can't wait. They're playing tonight. But yeah, I think that like was such a gift in writing the book. It forced me to pause, to reflect, to get to know my parents for who they were, the individuals they were. Because we kind of take our, it's like, oh, you're my mom, you're my dad. Like, that's how I know you. But they were people. They were individuals with hopes and dreams. And like what made them into who they are, we don't really always know that about our parents. And so I would encourage everyone to do that. There's actually a book called Storyful, I think, that's full of prompts. And then like you can ask the questions and then it types it up and binds it in a beautiful book that then makes a nice gift. Mother's Day is coming up. So there's a thought, consumer reporter in me.
I know, I was like,
but yeah.
Shameless
But
plug.
yeah, my mom, and I'm grateful because I really do now try to pause and reflect more and listen and slow down. My mom's 78. She's in great shape, but she's 78. And who knows? We don't know. Like, our time is, it's fleeting. And so whatever we can do to make the most of those moments with our family, I think are so important, and to recognize who they are.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I'm going to open up to the audience in a second. I just want to, I'm going to give you a minute for you to, get your thoughts together. But I do want to pay you a compliment because while, like I said, and you also said, while I see myself and you see yourself and your father in that character, and I see myself in you, what I also recognize and that I'm very grateful for within our friendship is that you have your mother's characteristic, and that while you might be in front of the camera like your father or like the main character of your book, you're also someone who champions other people behind camera. And I was sharing on my Instagram live on the way here how you definitely encourage me, inspire me, but encourage me and somewhat push me to be bold about myself and give me the space to step into that boldness even when I'm questioning my own ability. And not many people can do that. And you do that in the book where you didn't know how to do that growing up, but as you got a little bit more advanced in your career, you go back and you do kind of like an apology tour, a little bit in like one of the chapters of a couple people that you didn't recognize that you had treated a certain way. In the moment, you thought you treated them fine. But as you continue to evolve as a human being and wanting to be better in front of the camera, but more importantly, behind the camera, you go back and you apologize, especially to like one young girl who was working with you. And I just find that that is a reflection and something that I did see when I was pulling that thread through the narrative that comes from your mother. This ability to, again, steal the ship from the back, not always be in front of the camera. Main character energy is important. So I do want to pay you that compliment because I've also learned that from you through her to say, you know what, I can also rectify wrongs as I've evolved into a human by taking an opportunity to not only be better now, but to apologize for the past in even the most quirky, funny way that you established. It was so funny.
That chapter is called The Hot Intern.
Yes, and it was, we've all experienced the hot intern where you're just like, someone's coming in and you're like, oh my gosh, this person's not necessarily gunning for my job, but they could potentially take this position. There's usually, for women, only one of us. So, and again, it's a very quirky way of an apology tour of like coming back to say, I've learned to be a better human. I've learned to be a better corporate citizen, a better woman, a better leader. And again, I think that's a reflection of the behavior that was the thematic throughout your book for your mom. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Allie.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
On that note, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have, go ahead. There you go.
Sorry, forgive me. India has just attacked Pakistan, so I'm a little disconcerted. So Vicky. The question I have is on American exceptionalism. Do you think that a country with so much innovation, but with also 400 million guns, is truly exceptional? And if it is it on the way up or the way down, given the current political environment?
As an eternal optimist, I hope that we continue to climb. As someone who wasn't born in this country, and what I've seen happen for my family and many others in one generation, to go from being a boat baby to a network correspondent, I do think America is an exceptional place. I don't think it is the only place where something like this can happen, but I think there are few countries where someone can come with the background that I have, with parents that had $100 on them, and I can work next to someone who was the daughter and granddaughter of a president, and I can be on a bestseller list with someone who was a Kennedy. I pinch myself all the time that these things happened for me as quickly as they did. And I think that is because of the fact that this country is a diverse place with incredibly generous and kind people who we don't always hear about in the news, because the news is the bad news, right? Like, we don't hear about the families that are sponsoring refugees from Afghanistan as much as we hear about all of the other bad things that are happening. We don't hear about the churches that are continuing to do fundraising drives for the people in Gaza. We don't get to we have to search out those stories. They don't make the headlines. But if you are looking in your backyard, in your temples, your synagogues, your churches, you are looking at the schools and the communities that you live in, it's not hard to find what I believe to be the American spirit, because this is a country of plenty. And there is a lot of suffering here. There are things that we could do a lot better, and we are not a perfect country. But there are few other places that I would want to raise my children or for my family to have immigrated to. And so I believe, and I try every day in a career of public service, to make my corner of this country better, because that's all that I can control. That's all that I have in my power. And so when I can lead with grace, when I meet people, which I am so blessed to get to do in my job and ask a billion questions, and I can hide behind, well, tell me more why you feel that. I mean, I've lived in states where gun rights are very important. I've lived in states where religious rights are very important. Reproductive rights are very important. Border and immigration policies are very important. I've lived in Florida and Arizona and Nevada and California and now New York. And so I feel very fortunate that I can ask with genuine curiosity why people feel the way they do. And when they may not agree with, or when they may have positions that I fundamentally don't agree with. As a journalist, I'm still a human being first, right? So all I do as a journalist is I have to recognize and acknowledge my bias. I don't pretend that I am objective and that I have no opinions about anything. I have a lot of opinions about things, but I have to recognize them so that I can counterbalance for them when I am covering these issues. And so I have this position where I get to practice a lot, to ask questions and help myself understand. And you talk a lot about opening the aperture. That's all I try to do. I ask questions so I can learn. And then I may add a couple of points to the conversation, not to argue, not to win a conversation in that moment, but so that maybe a week from now or a month from now, that person that I met in line at the post office or on the airplane or in the course of doing work, maybe they'll think back to that lady they met, that Vicky Nguyen. She did have a point about this. And maybe it just opens their aperture, widens their perspective just a little bit. And I think if we all do that and we don't just look at what someone's wearing or like associate them immediately with an entire category of people, if we get to know people as our neighbor or the person that's sitting next to us on the bleachers at the basketball game, the way that we used to, I feel like we used to get to know people before we ever knew how they voted or what their stance was on X, Y, and Z policy. I think when we do that, we can humanize people and we can find our common ground more easily. It's tough now. I think social media has conditioned us to have instantaneous reactions and opinions and thoughts about everything. And we don't have to be that way. We can actually get to know someone, maybe even like them, and then be surprised that, oh, they feel this way about this thing, but then you already have some common ground, some foundation. You already see them as a person. And then maybe we can like build something from there. So I do think that this is an incredible country. I don't think we make all the right choices, and there are a lot of things that are beyond my control, but what I can control, I try to move us all forward in a positive way.
Another question? Ooh. You have another, okay, yeah.
I think we have one here, but thank you for that question, and we'll go back to you.
Yep.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to know what was your favorite part about writing this book?
Thank you. Well, I'm enjoying this part the most, that it's done, and then I get to talk to people who are reading it. That part is the best part after the book is done. But during the book process, I think I really just enjoyed the opportunity to do something I never do, which is to pause and to reflect and to really get to know my family better and to write down the history that I want my daughters to know. So I think the best part is actually gathering the information and then just like jamming out the chapters in a way that like I recall, and they were all very short. They're all pretty short chapters. I mean, people are saying like, oh, this book, I couldn't put it down, or like, I just kept wanting to read it because I think it's very digestible. And I really do think like if you're 8 to 80, like this book is for you. Like it's written in a very accessible way. So I think it's just it's fun to tell stories. It's fun to listen to stories and tell stories. And luckily, as a journalist, that is already my background. I just needed to train myself in understanding how memoir is written and like figuring out kind of the linear storytelling of it all and how to organize my thoughts into chapters. But once I got going, it was deeply satisfying to put all of that into words.
One of the things you do in the book is your husband is also a B-side character, not like he's still main character
B-side,
energy,
I love
but
it.
he's B-side character, right?
That's
of the
for
album, you have
cassettes.
your
We all remember,
your
right?
A-side and your B-side, right? He's B-side characters, and most times in our,
he wanted to be like Z-side character, like he didn't want to be in the book at all. But I met him when I was 14, and we started dating when I was 16. So I can't really write a memoir without having my husband be a part of that story. Yes. So I did try to like minimize him as much as possible, but at the same time, like he was there for all of it.
But one of the parts that he was there for that was really important, because I think, especially as women in corporate America, women in corporate careers, is that oftentimes they say 60% of, once you have a full-time job, you do 60%, if not 70% of the work, including the housework, including kids. You don't lighten the load, whereas men just work. This is a statistic, right? Things are shifting, things are changing. Sure. For you, You got a call. You flew out to New York for the job, the dream job, NBC. Oh my gosh, this is something I want. He has an amazing job, an amazing career. And it was a moment where you're just like, he's teetering, like, I'm not sure about this. We're not going to do this. And you're like, no, I think I want to do this. I want to move my entire family across the country to pursue my dreams. And he either has to decide to get on board or get off. And you have to decide if you're going to withhold, stand firm, and there's a compromise that needs to occur. And I will say historically, most times, again, historically, when you contextualize the relevancy of women and men in corporate and at home, the man decides what happens to the career, their career. They're the primary. You're the caregiver. Your kids need you. It was the opposite. Your B-side character, while again, main character energy, your husband said, despite his probably deep, if I had to read into the pages a little bit more and really flesh out the words, despite the core of who he was and what he probably really wanted to do, he not even allowed you, he allowed himself to get on board for you to pursue your dreams. He relocated his job to New York, relocated the family. You came out here and you changed your entire family's life. And he was on board with that. He got on board with that. Mm-hmm. And I want you to talk about pull back the curtain for us. What type of relationship and what type of human is that? Because it's not always easy to find, and it's not always easy to keep. And you've managed to do both.
Yeah, so true. Well, I did find him early, so that was just a stroke of luck because the 9th grade geometry teacher sat this kid right in front of me, and I'm 5'2". I was maybe 5'1" at that point because I was 14, and he's like 6'4". He's now 6'6". But imagine a giant person with a giant head sitting in front of me, and I was like, oh my, I can't.
I just want you to know you've lost one person in the audience. She envies you now. I'm not gonna say what it is. She's like.
I know. I feel like tall women really don't like me because I took a tall one off the market, and I don't need a tall one. I could have got a guy that was 5'5". I would have been fine. So I get it. I understand the tall women hate, and I'm like, I'm sorry. It just happened. Wasn't going after a big guy. It ended up that way. But we've been together for so long, and he and my mom actually are very alike. And that's really fascinating because my mom will come into a room, speak to me in Vietnamese, leave the room. And then my husband will come in and say the same thing that she just said in English. And I'm like, they're like a very similar wavelength type person. So I give him a lot of credit because he did have his dream job when I then got my dream job offer. And he took us through it very practically. And he didn't do anything wrong. Certainly for me, coming back from the high of doing 21 interviews at NBC and just feeling like, yeah, I nailed it. We're going to get this job. We're going to New York. And he was like, okay, yeah, but let's just see what the offer is. And he just really rained on my parade. And I was like, how dare you? Of course we're going. He's like, nothing's changed yet. We got to see what the offer is. He was being absolutely 100% correct and fair and reasonable as a person would. Before we move our whole family, let's just see if they're going to make it worth your while financially, if it just makes sense for us. I have this great job, all the things. So what he was saying in that moment is not what I needed. I needed in that moment for him to also be on the gravy train and cheering me on and just so excited. But in that moment, he was processing. He kind of probably inevitably knew some decisions will need to be made. But he was trying to still stay in neutral, practical, let's just see how things are going to go land. And eventually, because of him and that attitude, I did have to negotiate very hard for myself to get this job. And if I didn't have him being that stick in the mud, an appropriate stick in the mud, I probably would have taken the job and been paid a lot less. And so I'm happy. Once again, something that appears to be an obstacle or a hardship or something that you're like, well, why is this happening? Turns out in the long run to be exactly what I needed to encounter in that moment. And I'm grateful for it because we needed that. And eventually he did. I think he's very happy that we're here. He's very happy that the girls had the California experience. They're having the New York experience. We live in the suburbs now. I think that has greatly improved his quality of life because we came from the burbs, right? Blue skies and lawn and you have a dog, this city with all the concrete skyscrapers and the noise and that wasn't for us. And so I think after 2 years of being here, and mind you, it was the pandemic as well. He moved out in I think October of like 2018, and the pandemic hit like in April, March of 2019. So we had like 5 months of, oh, New York. And then all of a sudden it was like, we're in lockdown and we're in Central Park and there's nobody else around. So it took a minute to adjust to New York. People are like, how's he doing? I'm like, he's doing great. He's doing really well. He's really happy that the girls are having all this experiences. The toughest part is his family is still there. Like I got to take my whole package deal, like the whole parents, everybody came. So for him, his brother, his mom and dad are still in Santa Rosa. And by way of explanation, change was a way of life for me. Like every year from kindergarten to 5th grade, I'm in a new school, I'm the new kid, it's different. Like I've known nothing but change. So change is not a big deal for me. Even in our jobs, like your story can change moment to moment, right? He lived and was born in the same place, lived there for like his whole life, chose a profession that is like based on stability, being a doctor, right? And so change is like anathema to him. Like that is the last thing he wants. He wants to know what's happening, predictability, outcomes. Those are all the qualities you want in a doctor. Rolling with the punches, that's kind of what you want in somebody who's a news reporter. So, balancing those two personalities, there was compromise, as you would find in a marriage. But I think he's very happy with the way things have gone, and things have gone very well here. And there was a time early on when I was like, are you okay? Because every day I'd be like, how are you doing? He'd be like, I'm fine. And like, I didn't want that to be his whole existence forever. Like, I'm fine is not good, right? So a year or two into it, I was kind of like, well, I've done it. I've checked this box off. If we have to go back to California and you have to take that job again, I'm good with that. And he was like, are you kidding me? We've already moved here. We live here. You have to make it work. And I was like, oh, okay, no pressure. But luckily it was working. It was going well. And so, I wanted to compromise too. I wanted to make the offer, and I would have pulled up stakes and said, that was awesome. I did New York. I got to do the Today Show. Let's go back home. If it was going to be, I'm fine for the rest of our lives. He's doing better than fine now. Fine plus.
Fine plus, fine plus. We have a couple. Oh, yes, go for it.
Okay, I haven't read your book, but you said your mom would walk in and speak in Vietnamese, and then, so obviously she's kept her language. So have you also obviously kept that language?
I wish I were as fluent in Vietnamese as I am in English. Like I can hear it and I don't have to translate it in my mind. Like when I listen to Spanish, I'm like translating and picking up keywords. But in Vietnamese, it just sounds like English coming into my head. I don't have the extensive vocabulary that I have in English. I wish I did. And I asked my parents if they would speak exclusively to my daughters in Vietnamese.
Yeah, I was going to ask about your
that
children.
Was so important to me. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, but we'll teach them when they get older. And as you know, language acquisition happens from like babyhood. And I knew in kindergarten they would learn English like that. So I asked them. But the thing is, my parents, they raised me as Vietnamese parents. They became Vietnamese American grandparents. And so for them, they were so familiar with English and they see these kids and they just feel like, oh, there are words that they can better communicate with my kids in English that they just don't exist in Vietnamese. So unfortunately, they didn't, like speak strictly to them in Vietnamese. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for today. I have a question that's kind of related. As an immigrant myself and the daughter of immigrants, I really resonated with that section you talked about with struggle, specifically growing up here with immigrant parents. I wanted to know now as a mother how you do and do not try to replicate that struggle, the good struggle with your own daughters.
I love that question so much and all the questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for asking. But I think about it all the time. And I jokingly say that I try to manufacture hardship for them because they don't have it. They don't have the same authentic struggles that we did growing up where you just kind of don't feel like you fit in or you never see yourself represented in media or, you're always the new kid and like people are not so welcoming to you. Like they went to a bunch of different schools, but for them, fortunately, they've always sort of been welcomed. And so it wasn't tough for them to, make friends. They watch shows like Never Have I Ever, To All the Boys I've Loved. You see multiracial characters, like they're on screen. So the things that I remember struggling with, and they have parents that are obviously fluent in the language, we know things, right? So I think about it also from a financial perspective. And I had an expert on my show today who said, instead of saying we can't afford that, you say, we choose not to buy that. We choose not to have that thing because of whatever, environmental reasons, you have enough, whatever. But I look for ways, like social media, I think is like the scourge of this young generation. So I have successfully kept my oldest, who's 16, off of social media. She has a phone, but no apps. That like I know she's seen TikTok. I know her friends have Instagram, all that. But I actually like actively tell her, like, you can't be on it unless you can present to me some data, something that makes me think this is good for you. And I think that's a little bit of a struggle for her because she really is the only person in her school at her grade level that doesn't have social media. But I do think it's going to help her. I think, honestly, what it is doing is helping her build self-esteem and learn who she is before the rest of the world tells her who she is. So, and I really try to impress upon them how fortunate they are all the time. They hear the I get tos all the time, like I get to, not I have to. And they know that they have a lot of privilege and that I expect them to turn around and use it in a positive way to serve their school community, to serve our community, to just be nice to the other kids who like come in who don't have as much, just to be aware of what they have. And I point it out to them all the time because we live in a place where like there are a lot of people who are very well off. And I point it out to them and I tell them how different it was from when I was growing up. I try not to lecture them and make them like roll their eyes, but I do think the fact that my parents live with us too, that's kind of ingrained in who they are and they know what kinds of experiences my parents had growing up.
You know, I have this conversation a lot. You know, my family's Black, right? We were enslaved, moved to America. We didn't move, we were brought to America, live here now. But I have this a lot as like, the goal of each generation, I assume most of us, is that you work really hard so that your kids and then their kids don't have to struggle as much. But I come back to a fundamental question when we have this conversation, whether you're immigrant, you're brought here again, because there's a desire, or like there was a desire in design, or you were desperate. Either way, you were brought here. Does struggle make a better human than non-struggle? And I don't know if we've figured out that answer. I have this at length with friends. Do we think struggle make better humans than non-struggle?
I mean, I gotta say I do because
Really?
That's what I know. That's what I know. I mean, I do think it's hard, but I look at people who've overcome things too. Like, and I'll just use pop culture references because everybody knows who Oprah is. And how many sexual assaults and molestations she survived. And she's like the enduring figure in media and has changed so many people's lives and was somehow able to pull herself out of poverty as well as childhood of abuse. I mean, I don't know that struggle gets any tougher than those things that she endured. Tyler Perry is another one where I just feel like.
But does struggle make good humans? It makes for great narratives and great, you want like outcomes and stories and how do you say, motivation and inspiration. It does make for all of that, but does it make good humans?
Like what makes a good human?
Exactly. Like I'm just like.
Oh, okay. So to me, a good human is someone who is able to give back, somehow make the world a better place than what they had, what they experienced. So it doesn't have to be huge. It just means it maybe if you are a hurt person that you don't go on to hurt other people, I think that's a good human. And I think there are many people who were hurt and went through struggle that were able to overcome that and break that cycle. I think that makes a good human. You don't have to be Oprah. That's not my point. My point is that people who have been through things and have overcome things can still make a lot out of their lives and their, just being alive, right? I think of Holocaust survivors all the time. We don't have a lot of them left with us. And I don't think I've ever really seen one on television or met one that wasn't like somehow so positive and smiling and just happy to be here. And you just think, well, gosh, if you can forgive or if you can somehow find something in your day that made you smile, I have nothing to complain about. So that's kind of how I feel. Not that that's like a good thing for somebody to go through or that if you struggle that it makes you less human, but if you can struggle and somehow overcome that and not pass it along to others, I think that makes a good human.
Thank you. I think we're at time. One last question to close us out. I usually ask most folks that I sit down with. We are in New York City, but if we were in London, it would be in a billboard in Covent Gardens. We're here in Times Square. What would your billboard in Times Square, Covent Gardens, like in some of the biggest cities in the world, if you had one line, one sentence, maybe one word to put on that billboard, what would it be?
It's something that I'm glad you asked me this and I actually have an answer because that's a really good question. I normally would never have an answer, but it's something I've been signing in a lot of books, and that is every day is a gift. That's why they call it the present. I just love that. It resonates with me.
Yes.
I never heard it anywhere else, but like I came up with it one day and I was like, I like that a lot because that's kind of how I go through life. I really do feel that way. Every day is a gift. And I think that people, I've heard that saying, when you live in the past, you're kind of depressed. If you live in the future, you're anxious. But if you live in the present, you can find peace. That is easier said than done. But that's why I do think every day really is a gift. And that's why we call it the present.
Well, thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you.
And of course, your information. Great job.
Thank
Give it
you,
up for
Ali.
Vicky, everyone.
Yes,
Vicky Nguyen.
and for Ali, what an incredible conversation, a brilliant moderator.